Assalamualaikum, everybody. Like Dr. Naveed said, my name is Shehryar. I'm currently the CEO of the Petroleum Institute of Pakistan. But till last year, I was CCO for PSO, responsible for all the sales, marketing, and supply chain of all of PSO's businesses. So the retail fuels business, the gaseous fuels, aviation, the industrial businesses, the cards business, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do today is walk you through this one. Okay. So how this is going to flow today is just a brief oil sector overview of the three key components within the oil sector, how the product supply chains are structured, the value chain analysis of where all of the value resides and who makes the decisions on those. What are the key supply chain issues within this sector? And then something that obviously Dr. Saab has touched on, I presented half of my presentation himself, is on the demand management and what we need to do after that. So just an overview. So there are three key components of the oil and gas sector. There's the exploration and production sector, there's the refining, and there is the sales and marketing sector. So in the E&P, the domestic E&P doesn't contribute more than about 20% as of last year to the energy need, the oil and gas needs of the country. The other concern is that this is a declining resource. Our gas reserves are declining on average at about 6%. You know, it varies year to year, but around 6%, I would say, a year. The reserve replacement ratio for oil is at about 30%, which means that for every 100 barrels that we extract, we only replace 30 of them. So that means that at some point in the not too distant future, whether it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years, this is the time frame, we will run out of gas. And eventually we will run out of domestic oil as well, unless there are new finds, large new finds. And unfortunately, the way we use gas and electricity, as we've talked about, is not going to help that. On the refining side, now, most of the refineries in Pakistan, there are 5 mainstream refineries. These refineries were set up with specific product slates, and those product slates were heavy with furnace oil, because there was a time back, 20, 30 years ago, when a lot of these refineries were set up, even before that, when furnace oil was used for power generation. So the refinery slate is fixed. You can't play around with it. You can't suddenly today decide to have 5% furnace oil if it's designed at 30% furnace oil. So what's been happening is that over the last 3 or 4 years, furnace oil consumption in the power sector has reduced significantly. You've got LNG coming in and other generation fuels. So as a result of that, the refineries cannot operate at full capacity. They have an installed capacity of about 19.5 million tons a year. But they're only producing between 11 and 13, depending on which year it is. So significantly below their installed capacities. Refineries are very, very capital-intensive businesses. To upgrade a refinery so that that slate can change requires billions of dollars. There's actually one refinery in Karachi, Pakistan Refinery Limited, which was just announced a couple of months ago, an $800 million upgrade, where as part of which, or as a result of which, their furnace oil production will drop to maybe 2 or 3%, or something like that. So the mix will change. That's an $800 million investment. Similarly, other refineries need to do that. Similar amounts will be needed. On the marketing and distribution side, there are significant infrastructure constraints because most of the infrastructure in this industry is old. There is very little new infrastructure, whether it's the ports, which have their own challenges, or the transportation infrastructure. There is no gas storage in the country. Various projects or studies have been conducted. I think ISGS is currently engaged in finalizing one for developing gas storages, using wells to do it, or whatever other technology. There is liquid fuel storage. It's about 3.5 million tons within the whole spectrum of the oil marketing companies, the refineries, and the pipeline companies. But we do need much more storage, and there are challenges in that, which I'll talk about. So just to give you a few numbers, last financial year, the total market was about 23 million tons. Of that, crude imports were 9.2 million tons. Domestic crude was, I think, about 3 million tons. And 13.2 million tons was finished products, which is diesel, primarily diesel and petrol, some products also. So local refineries last year only produced 11.6 million tons out of a total installed capacity of 19.5 million tons. So there is a very high dependence on imported products. And this also leads to no control over the pricing. So if the international prices go up, there's no way that this kind of energy dependence on imports, the country cannot cope with that. So, hence the dwindling foreign exchange reserve because of this big commodity super cycle that we're seeing right now. So I'll briefly talk about the three main liquid fuel, the petroleum supply chains and how they work. So the first one is crude. So crude, we get from two sources. There's local crude and there's imported crude. More imported, less local. This is imported by the refineries. No one else in Pakistan is allowed to import crude. Only the refineries can import it. They will process it into finished products, which is petrol, diesel, jet fuel, kerosene, etc. And then through pipeline and road network, they supply it to the OMCs, the oil marketing companies. And the oil marketing companies then in turn supply it to their customers, which could be commercial customers, retail customers, and we are all users of that fuel as retail customers, or aviation, or any other industrial customers. The second supply chain is the finished goods supply chain. Again, there are two sources. One is the refineries, as we mentioned earlier, and the second one is imports. Over 13 million tons last year of finished goods. And again, only the oil marketing companies are allowed to import finished product, petroleum products. Nobody else. Which means that if there is an investor, if somebody wants to invest in this, if somebody is sitting on $1 billion and say, I want to bring this and get into this business, they can't. They can't bring in any petroleum products. They're not allowed. They won't get a license unless they're an oil marketing company. And again, through a pipeline and road network, the OMCs then supply the product to other customers. And then the third one is the LNG, which in the last 5 or 6 years has dominated the public discourse for various reasons. So it is 100% import, comes in through two terminals, the Anglo terminal and the PGPCL terminal. The Anglo terminal was set up by Imran. He's, in record time, by the way, just to, as far as I know, and he can comment on that. Fantastic. And then it goes into the SSGC and then the SNGPL system. Most of the LNG is sold to SNGPL customers in the Punjab. A little bit goes to SSGC customers. I think they're supplying K Electric and somebody else, but it's primarily through the SNGPL system into the Punjab. So now we talked about the value chain, and this may surprise some of you. The businesses who've invested billions of dollars in this whole system have no control over the entire value chain. The prices of all these products are determined based on international benchmarks, whether it's flats in the case of the finished goods, or Brent in the case of LNG. Taxes are determined by the government of Pakistan. The transport costs involved What margin these companies will make and what the end selling price will be is determined by the government of Pakistan or the regulator. Which means that if I invest 100 rupees in this business today as an investor, I have no clue what that return of investment will be 5 years or 10 years down the road. I can make projections, I have no control over that. I have no control over my buying price, or very little control, taxes, obviously, no control over all of the margins and the costs in the system. So this regulated environment, and this is one of the most regulated industries in Pakistan and in comparison to other countries around the world, even some of our neighboring countries. This is highly regulated. So when we say, why doesn't investment come in? Well, this is a big reason. Investors will not come in if they don't know how much they're going to make out of it, particularly foreign investors. This is a big issue. Now, we'll walk through some of the key issues. Most of them are structural issues, infrastructure issues. And Brigadier Saab also mentioned the structural issues that this industry is facing. So we start with the ports. So we have two ports where fuels come in. There is Himari, the best, which has 3 oil piers, and there is Fortco, which has a single jetty. Now, more and more of the finished goods imports are coming to Fortco. And the reason for that is that something we haven't earlier talked about is that originally diesel and now petrol as well are being transported through the white oil pipeline, which is a pipeline that goes from Karachi to Mahmudkot, and then from there on to Machike and Faisalabad and all that. So, and the connection for that is only with Fortco, which means that originally all the diesel was coming there, a little bit at Kimari as well for local supplies. But now that load has increased. So Fortco can take around 15, sometimes 16 cargoes a month. In the summer months, 20, 21, 22 cargoes come in. So, which means that in 2 years, the oil marketing companies have paid over $60 million in demurrages just because of the delays, because we don't have the port infrastructure. So imagine this, 10 years down the road, if nothing happens, there is no way that this port infrastructure can support the kind of growth that we are seeing in the fuel supply chain. So this is a huge issue. At Fortco, for example, when the LNG cargoes were due to come in and all that, so one of the things that Fortco said they would implement is night navigation. It's been 5 or 6 years now, Imran, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's still no night navigation, which means that the time during which these cargoes can come in and go out is restricted to your daylight hours. So that puts more pressure on the system. The channels have not been dredged in years. So that reduces the size of the ships that can come in. Last year, a couple of ships bottomed at the berths because of tide issues. So the port infrastructure is a huge weak link in this whole thing, because we're importing the vast majority of our liquid energy. Once we go past the ports, there are two transportation methods. We talked about the white oil pipeline, which originally was only carrying diesel up country, but since October of last year, it has also started carrying some of the petrol. Eventually, the idea is that it should carry all of them. It's a safer and cheaper mode of transportation. However, there is a huge investment that a lot of people have made in the road transport network, which was the traditional system. And these transporters are not keen to have their business vanish. If all of it goes through the pipeline, or the majority of it, the billions of dollars that these guys have invested over the last 4 or 5 decades will be up in smoke. And since a lot of them are small business owners, they're not large corporations. They're people with 2, 3, 4, or 10, tank lorries. So then they create a lot of issues as to, that their livelihoods are being washed away. So this is a disconnect. It's cheaper to send it through the pipeline. Capacity is there, but there are other pressures that force us to keep sending a lot of the gasoline to the tank lorry fleet. But then most of those tank lorry fleet now, they're old, there are compliance issues, they cause congestion on the roads, they're inefficient in terms of fuel consumption, so they're old engines. So a lot of issues with, on the fuel transportation. Like I mentioned earlier, we have about 3.5 million tons of storage. Now, storage is very expensive to make, particularly because, and getting more expensive because the steel or the iron required for it is imported. You don't make that kind of iron here. So as international prices go up or as the dollar appreciates in value, it becomes more and more and more expensive to make storage. The other issue is that in the port areas, particularly in Kimari and there are some defense-related concerns where no new storage is allowed. Now, because this area is the hub of the entire system, and the networks are there and the players are there, so if you can't make more storages at the ports, again, the entire supply chain is going to suffer. So this has been an issue that the industry has taken up with the MOD and the government of Pakistan over the last 10 years, but there's little progress on that. So they say to take it away to hub of some of those areas and build storages there, but that adds a lot of cost because the connectivity to those areas becomes then adds to the cost of that. Again, for all of us who are users of fuel, we you hear about issues in particularly 2 years ago when COVID hit, there were some swings in the supply chain of liquid fuels, and there were some issues that OMCs aren't keeping enough stocks, etc. Now, as per their license, the OMCs are required to keep 20 days inventory of their products, diesel and petrol mainly. But there is no agreement on what that 20 days means. Is it 20 days projection? Is it based on their last year's 20 days average, last 3 months average? Nobody knows. The regulator doesn't know. Nobody is able to give that answer. So everybody interprets it accordingly and says, okay, so here's my interpretation. It could, somebody's got 15 or 18, and based on how they calculate it, they tend to say that, I'm holding those inventories. The fines that the regulator can impose on them are very small relative to the values. So they're quite comfortable paying those fines if they don't have enough storage rather than investing in keeping storage. Again, and this obviously in the last year, as costs have gone up and the dollar has appreciated, this has become a huge issue. Again, because the government determines the pricing, and the pricing is determined every 15 days based on a formula. So if I'm holding 20 days stock and the government is changing the price every 15 days, so either I'm going to lose a lot of money every 15 days, because if my stock is worth 100 rupees and now I have to sell it at 90, so I lose those 10 rupees. Or I'm going to gain, because if the price goes up and my cost is 100 and I have to now sell it at 110, and I'll make gains. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the retail fuel supply system, again, because it is a highly regulated system, and the companies in it do not have the flexibility to set their own prices and manage their own business accordingly. It's completely dependent on the government. So there's been talk of circular debt, but this is and this is not my own term. A colleague of mine used this term. This is actually not circular debt. This is semi-circular debt, because a huge portion of this debt is sitting on the balance sheets of 3 companies who are paying all their suppliers. So it debt comes and stops on the balance sheets of these companies. And PSO, OGDCL, and PPL. These PSO and OGDCL combined right now, I think, are over ₹1 trillion. ₹1 trillion of this so-called circular debt is sitting on the balance sheets of two companies which are not passing that circle on. So they're paying everybody. If PSO doesn't pay its suppliers, the country will shut down in 2 weeks. That's the sensitivity of this matter. So there's a huge load on 2 or 3, and these are all commercial organizations, by the way. They get no government budgets or subsidies or anything like that. They make their money, they run their businesses on purely commercial basis. They are not, they just happen to be owned by the government. So this is a huge issue, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of a solution. Originally, this circular debt was primarily the power-related area, but now it has become LNG-related. So on the LNG, just to dimensionalize that, right now, SNGPL, who is the prime user of the LNG, owes PSO and PLL, the other importer of LNG, I think over 400 billion rupees. And that's close to $2 billion, whatever the current exchange rate is, that one company owes to two other companies. This is not a sustainable system. It cannot continue like this. And again, like Asim also mentioned, that most of the gas, at least a lot of the indigenous gas, and now in winters, for the last 4 or 5 years, the LNG a lot of it has also been diverted to domestic. So from where there is no recovery from that loss. So this is what Dr. Saab also referred to. Nobody talks about the demand. They're all looking for supply side solutions. How to get something cheaper or more or at better terms or credit or whatever. Nobody talks about the fact that as a country, we are only focused on consumption. Whatever that resource may be, whether it's energy or whether it's water or whether it's the food we have. I mean, there's very little input or there's no production or there's no focus on production, just consuming in that regard. Again, my first point relates to the point that you had, cooling the walls. Then indigenous gas is primarily being diverted. The domestic is the highest priority sector when the gas load management happens. Is domestic, and then all of the other industrial and commercial come after. So which means that at huge subsidy, we are sending gas to be used inefficiently in cooking across the year and then heating in some parts of the country in the winters. And also our cooking habits and the way we eat food and the kind of social habits we develop, are contributing even more because, we cook food in the morning and then we cook food again at night. And, we don't want to have morning's food in the evening and fresh rotis and whatever it is. There's no harm in cold food, but everything has to be fresh and cooked. So there needs to be behavioral change for this to happen. This is a huge, huge issue. After 10 years, thereabouts, there'll be no more gas. So unless people start changing their behavior now, in 10 years, they'll be forced to. And there's no price signaling either. If your gas bill the average gas bill was 50,000 or 60,000 rupees, the way the air conditioning or the power bills are, people would not waste it. But somebody who's paying 1,000 or 2,000 rupees a month for gas, who cares? So then also the appliances we use, there are no standards for that. It's all wastage in terms of the leak. There's methane leakage in a lot of the gas appliances, which is bad for the health. There's fire hazards because this is open flame cooking, everywhere. Then, a lot of us don't pay our bills. Hopefully, nobody in this room, but a lot of different parts of the country. Some can't afford it. Some don't want to pay. And, so they won't pay their bills, or they'll collude with the guy who comes to read the meters to minimize their bills. So that just keeps compounding the issue. When you talk about line losses, a lot of it is the fact that people just don't want to pay their bills. Again, Dr. Saab also talked about commercial activity, and it starts late and ends late. There's no reason for that. You go to a lot of countries around the world, shops close at 8. Don't have to continue till 11 o'clock. You don't have to wander around in the bazaars at 12 or the restaurants at 12. There's no need for that. That is also an issue. Then one other factor, and I put it in here because I think it's a significant contributor to a lot of our issues, that the entire energy chain is dominated by public sector companies, whether it's the E&P companies or the biggest oil marketing company or the power companies. A lot of them are public sector companies. The gas utilities, they're all public sector. So the way the issues of the public sector companies in terms of governance and efficiency and interference by other sectors is something that is not sustainable. There's no way we can continue with such a heavy footprint of the public sector and the government in this entire energy system. So what do we do? I have some suggestions. I think, none of these should be a surprise to anybody. The first is deregulation. The government has to get out of the business of regulating the prices of everything. Whether it's energy or whether it's wheat or whether it's sugar, or this is not a good way to ensure the success of these sectors. This is just a good way to freeze different components of that sector or pass subsidies to whatever it is. So energy price recovery is another issue. Obviously, we talked about the fact that people don't pay their bills. There are systems around the world. Africa has implemented some of these either prepay or pay-as-you-go systems where you load money onto your meter, and if the load goes out, the meter cuts out. There's no more parts. You load more money. These can be explored, and there are a lot of technology solutions that can be used for this. Then, again, I talked about the public sector organizations. We need to privatize these. They need to run on pure commercial business principles. Yes, there will be issues initially. There is this fear in the system that consumers will suffer if these companies are privatized, but that's not true. So many other businesses and sectors are working. For example, Pakistan is the largest importer of tea in the world. Some of you knew that, maybe not. The largest importer of tea in the world. And you know how many companies are in that business in Pakistan? 3. 2 local, 1 multinational. That's it. We've never had tea shortages. We've never had issues where there's been tea hoarding. We've never had issues where there are riots on the streets because the tea is too expensive. They manage it on commercial principles. There's competition, but it's only 3 companies. Just in the oil marketing sector, there are 66 licenses issued for oil marketing companies. About 35 of them are currently active. 35 companies. The sector is not big enough to support all those. So if somebody thinks that if you deregulate it, suddenly we'll all be paying a lot more money for, or higher prices for our fuel, that's not true. There'll be intense competition. Everybody will benefit. Then, like some also talked about construction methodology. There's a lot of work going on globally on more energy efficient houses and traditional knowledge as well. That we all kind of grew up with, some of us did at least, in terms of the higher roofs and the Roshandan and the whole thing, which helped to cool the house and didn't require air conditioning. So that the building codes and that whole industry needs to change. There are simple solutions as well. We talked about this last week. If you mandate that the roof of every house must be painted white, all of it, that in itself, and it's not very expensive to do, it's just, paint the roof white. That will help to reflect some of the heat and reduce some of the oven on the second floor or the top It's a simple solution. Some countries have started to implement this. White reflective paint, you do it in a day. It doesn't require much for houses or commercial buildings or whatever. It can be mandated. It's not very expensive either. And then again, people who don't pay, they shouldn't get the energy. Simple as that. We have to have solutions whereby we cut off supply. I know that in some areas, we cut off entire feeders, with the high loss feeders, but there are still some people there who then suffer because of that. So if my neighbor's not paying, or 10 of my neighbors are not paying, but I'm paying, but I'm cut off as well, then it's unfair to me. So the solution needs to be narrower and more on the consumer level than just the feeder level, in my opinion. Then commercial activity, we talked about that. Change the timings. Again, these are not decisions that require any investment. They don't require millions of dollars to implement. These are simple changes. This happened during COVID. Right? During COVID, for example, particularly in Karachi, I think not so much here in Lahore, but in Karachi, shop timings changed. Petrol pumps were not allowed to open beyond 5 o'clock. And that was it. They opened at 6 in the morning or whatever it was, closed at 5. So they weren't open at night. Only for emergency vehicles, police and ambulances and all. But, so it can be done. There were no riots, people agreed to it. So people can still agree to it. If there's proper communication, if everybody understands why this is happening, then, this is the need of the day. You can't just, as long if you can't believe in all the conspiracy theories of what's happening or that the government is doing it for some nefarious motives. No, we don't have the energy and we can't pay for it. We have to start conserving all of our energy, whether it happens voluntarily or it will have to happen at some point by force. But better to change ourselves today than to it be done by force tomorrow. And then obviously, this is kind of a no-brainer, the push towards renewables. Again, renewables is promoted as the answer to all of the questions, but there are some issues with the renewables as well, because the renewables technology requires a lot of mining activity. Whether it's wind or you need a lot of metal, you need rare metals, you need all of these things to build country scale renewable energy. So while on the one hand, yes, your energy will be cheaper and more efficient, but on the other hand, it will require far more mining activity around the world to mine the minerals and everything that's required to build those renewable energy infrastructure. So there is a bit of a catch-22 in that. And the mining activity will obviously use other kinds of energy and the environmental degradation involved with that as well. So that's pretty much it. I think we have time. If there are any questions. Are we on time?
We are slightly delayed, but I think it's manageable. So again, thank you very much for a wonderful talk. But oh boy, we just had 2 presentations and we saw so many challenges. Just 2 more to go. So I think it's a good time to maybe we take a break for tea or coffee and enjoy being the status of the largest importer of tea. Drinking tea. So thank you very much. We'll meet in about 20 minutes time. Thank you.
Tea's outside, so please help yourself.